This particular topic is crucial, and it really is at the heart of everything that we've been talking about thus far, at the heart really of supporting people to have full, inclusive lives and to, in fact, build stronger communities. It is a topic that is beautiful, it is inspiring, it's compelling. It is a topic that is, in fact, very rooted in our unique, our individual human identities, and in our unique place within the human family, within the world. I propose to you that, of course, all human beings have gifts. Those gifts, I believe, are part of what is unique to human beings, and that each of us is gifted so that we can go, in fact, bless others. And Parker Palmer, who is a wonderful speaker and writer who speaks about our birthright gifts, and he speaks about the fact that, in fact, we all are born with gifts. And unfortunately, oftentimes, those gifts get abused and disabused. And so each person, then, we would say, is uniquely gifted. And we all, in fact, need each other and one another's gifts for wholeness, for edification, for strength. We need one another's gifts so that we can each live out our own callings and our own destinies. I remember hearing a talk once, and the title of that talk was, "You've Got a Piece of My Puzzle." And so, of course, if we think about that, in order to create the whole picture, all of us have our puzzle pieces. And to make that picture complete, we have to take those pieces and put them together. Or think of an orchestra, where each instrument in and of itself is very, very beautiful. But when they are all played together, and each instrument is given its own weight in turn, the result is even more beautiful. So we come bearing gifts. Now, it seems obvious, of course, that people with disabilities, just as all people, of course, bring gifts to the world. But just as happens with many of us, our gifts do not get recognized. And for people with disabilities, this is even more pronounced. Indeed, there is a dullness in our senses. So we don't see, we don't hear, we don't perceive, we don't really understand people's giftedness. And why is that? I think there are many reasons, and I'll just touch on a few today. One thing that's very difficult to think about is that sometimes people are not considered really as full human beings. I've seen many situations, current contemporary situations where actually people are treated more like objects, more like vegetables than human beings. I think of a child I just recently met in a special education classroom. She is brought into her class in her wheelchair, taken out of her wheelchair, put on a mat, and that's where she lies all day long. People were not thinking, here is a child who is here on this earth for a purpose and brings a gift that we need to recognize. I recently was doing a presentation, and 3 young men were so scornful. And so I went up to them at the break and I said, it doesn't seem like this information is really connecting with you. Can you tell me, what are some of your struggles? And they said, well, the people we work with, we just spend the entire day putting them in isolation or in restraint. And so for them, they literally saw the people that they were working with as these very dangerous people. And so giftedness was not even on their radar. Or when people are put into the role of being pitiful, of course, then we think, that here are people who need to be given to. We're not thinking about what do people have to give to us. It's clear there are many other kinds of role expectancies I could talk about. I guess the other one I do want to mention, though, that I've seen more and more is that very dangerous stereotype that, in fact, people are better off dead. And I, recently went to visit a service for children with significant disabilities, and all of the children were thought to be in a state of dying, although many of them, were quite healthy and doing quite well. In the living room of the house, there was a wall with a picture of all of the children who had died, and a wall with a picture of the children who were still alive. And they literally said to me, you see, it's very convenient. because when one of the children dies, we just, take the picture from the live wall and put it on the wall where the children who passed away are honored. And I tell you, in that environment, it's a very bleak situation. And certainly, there's no thinking about giftedness. In fact, as a result of these kinds of stereotypes and devaluation, people then are put in places that often compromise, degrade, or even try to extinguish their giftedness. And so their gifts then do not have opportunities to come forth, to be recognized, to flourish. Why don't we recognize people's gifts? Well, sometimes it's because we have this need versus this capacity, orientation, and mindset. So people are seen as needy and deficient. It's very, very insidious. It's part of the way those of you who work in services would have been trained. We focus on the deficits. I know, I used to be a worker. This is the way I was trained. And for families as well. Very early on, families get the message, you need to focus on the deficit and we need to try to fix it. If we're just focused on the deficiencies, we don't see the giftedness. Another reason we don't recognize people's gifts is that we live in a very materialistic age, and that isn't just about, getting things. It's also the fact that we think of things material, and that's what we value. And that's true even for giftedness. So oftentimes, we may not recognize the gifts that people have to bring to us because they're not material, in a sense. They're not real tangible. Many of the gifts that people with disabilities bring to us are not material gifts. Another reason why we miss oftentimes the giftedness of people is our frantic pace of life and our lack of inner life. I've found, and I'm sure you have too, that to really be able to discern anybody's giftedness, it takes time. It takes being with a person. It takes reflection. It takes slowing down, experiencing the person, being thoughtful, and so forth. And another reason that I think that we oftentimes do not recognize people's gifts is our arrogance and our pridefulness. I've heard people say this, well, I'm the caretaker. What could those people give to me? As I was preparing this, I was overcome when I began to reflect on the many gifts that I have been given by people with disabilities. And I'm so grateful that my journey in life has been graced with so many fine people. So I'm going to share some examples to reflect and honor people with disabilities and their giftedness. One would be the gift of courage. I think of all of the people I've known who have walked into places where they were not wanted, where they were even, completely ignored, but had the courage to continue to go into those places and confront those stereotypes. When my daughter went into first grade, she had a very difficult teacher, a very difficult aide. They never really accepted her. They oftentimes did reject her. But I'm telling you, every single day, that 6-year-old child got on the bus. And when I gave Mary a way out, said, Mary, would you like to stay at home? Would you like to be homeschooled? She said, nope, Mom, I go to school. The gift of wisdom, offering so much wisdom about so many things. I think of one gentleman I met. He had had such an impoverished life. He'd lived most of his life in an institution. And he had finally moved into a home where he was able to have a few meager possessions, which he was very proud of. And he was showing me his bedroom, and he pulled out his radio. I was very excited about having this radio. He showed it to me, and I was admiring it. And he turned to me, he said, you really like this radio, don't you? And I said, it is. It's really beautiful. And he said, take it. And I said, oh, no, I couldn't take the radio. Please take it, he said. I thought to myself, I wonder if you came to visit me and you liked something that was really precious to me that I'd maybe waited years to get, would I say to you, take it? I doubt it. Wisdom about, what's right and what's wrong in the world. The gift of challenge to us, to think differently. How many of us in here have been challenged by people with disabilities? My daughter challenges me all the time. She's got an idea of what she wants in her life, and she's taking me places that, I really didn't ever imagine that we would go. Or to challenge us to really take a look at ourselves. Sometimes people will confront us and take us to a deep place within ourselves that we would never have reached, never have gone, if that person hadn't been in our life. Maybe the person with a disability confronts you with your weaknesses, your inconsistencies, that then force you to take a look at those things and ultimately, hopefully, to move through them and become stronger yourself. Another very good example of the challenge that people bring is a couple who are actually Harvard professors, and they had a son born to them with an intellectual disability. And she says, John and I have experienced this sense of living a wonderful dream many, many times since Adam was born. The choice we made to accept him into our lives has done much more than give us a son we love to distraction. It has made risk-takers of us. We are now irrationally convinced that there is little to lose by taking the road less traveled, by making decisions based on dreams or intuition or our heart's desires. Since Adam came along, we have quit good jobs, formed unusual relationships, undertaken projects that seemed quixotic or just plain silly. And sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail, but it's always a great ride. Clarity, another gift that people offer. I think about Michael, a man who's also been one of my major teachers, and Michael's had a very difficult life, and at one point he was living in an institution, and he was so driven to have a home that literally Michael would stop people on the street and he would say, "Do you have a home? You do? Can I come live with you?" And the service saw that, he was really distressed about not having a home, and so what they offered him was therapy, so that he could talk about his feelings of not having a home and become more, settled and at ease with it. And Michael was just great, he'd say, "Why are you talking to me about not having a home? Get me a home." He was just able to cut through, and very clear about what the real issues were. Peacemaking. There's a very wise teaching that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And my daughter, really, I don't think she has ever been taught that, but she instinctively knows that. And so if my husband and I have an argument, she makes sure that we make up. And she's very adamant about it, so she'll take my husband's hand. She'll say, "Come on, Dad." And she'll take my hand. "Come on, Mom." She brings us together, and that's not enough. We have to kiss, right? And then we have to hug. And then we have to do a family hug. And by the time you go through this, you're disarmed a bit, right? Tenacity. So to keep trying. We all have many examples of this in the face of such stereotypes and prejudice and barriers and obstacles, to just keep pushing forward and trying. Faith and hope in the face of such adversity. So I'm just so inspired by this Michael. He never, ever, even when he was being treated so badly, never gave up hope, that his life would one day be different. And he was able to get up every day, face that adversity, and indeed, now today Michael does have a very, very different life. He does have his own home. But, it took 20 years. Forgiveness and mercy, I've certainly experienced this gift, many times where I've said and done things, that were really horrible, and yet I've still been forgiven. An example of this is a man in an institution who actually was abused by one of the people who worked there on the night shift, and yet, he, in fact, continued to be kind to this man. And eventually what happened to that man who was the abuser, he had a 360-degree change because of the mercy and the forgiveness that was given to him. The gift of encouragement. And my daughter is always encouraging me. She'll say, "I clap, Mom, for your work. Do you have the words, Mom? Do you have the words, Mom? If you don't have the words, Mom, you're going to get the words. It's okay, you're going to get the words." And the call to life, of bringing meaning to life. So a mom who I know quite well was raising two very young children, and she said, it was great, but on the other hand, she was getting a little tired of changing the diapers and, preparing the food and bottles and so forth. And she said, "I know raising children is important, but I'd like something else." And her third child with a disability was born. And this mom has now gone on to be one of the great leaders in her local community and, is doing great things for people with disabilities. And many of the gifts that I've mentioned here that people with disabilities have speak to the most important issues in life and call people into mercy, forgiveness, deep reflection, appreciation of the important things in life. And those things are very challenging to achieve in this day and age where we have values of individualism, focus on me, myself, and I, materialism, where we have a pleasure orientation, and so forth. Secondly, some of the spiritual truths that people call us to is that because of the way our society is, many people with disabilities experience lots of suffering. And I think, one of the spiritual truths we can glean looking at the lives of many people who have gone through great suffering is that suffering is part of humanity. We're not going to be able to fix it all, but it can be lived with grace and mercy, and a lot can be learned from it. I just want to ask you this question. What is the message when people with intellectual impairments know more about the important things in life than the people who have the great intellect, who can create fantastic software, put people on the moon, and so forth? Well, perhaps, the message is that our intellect is bankrupt, and that indeed we as societies are in great danger. And so I ask you, are these not gifts needed and even required by any thoughtful, healthy, and strong community? When we really begin to see the giftedness that people bring to our world, it's as though a fog has in fact been lifted from our eyes. That different view leads to a whole new world. I share a story with you of a dad who said, I wrote this after 2 weeks of being in an inclusive community where gifts and differences were valued. I looked into Annie's eyes this morning, my daughter's eyes, and I searched for what was wrong. What is her disability? As I looked in her eyes at her hair blown by nights tossing and turning, she smiled and smiled, and my heart hurt with sensations all over. Where is it? I could find no wrong with Annie in her beauty as I looked at her this morning. Annie played with her dog Polly, and Polly danced and barked, and Annie sprayed water at Polly's barks, and they danced around the room. I felt as I was coming through a thick fog this morning, I cannot see anything wrong with Annie. I cannot find or feel anywhere in my body that tight, almost nauseous feeling I've always had when I think about what's wrong with Annie. She is simply a beautiful, joyful child, precious. As I sit this morning feeling a trembling in my belly, I really start to see how precious Annie truly is. And I'm angry for all the laborers who have sought to steal my daughter's life. And I'm sad that I have so many times taken their lies inside me, seeing Annie as organically brain damaged or disabled or whatever else. I have often seen my child with eyes of guilt and shame. I have been robbed of the present. It is so obvious at this moment that there are only people filled with giftedness and possibilities. I see Annie so clearly in this moment. I know now I do not have to live the labeler's eyes. I know in this moment of truth, Annie is gifted. And so let all of us slow down to be open to people's giftedness, to really discern and accept people's giftedness. Embracing giftedness opens the way for full inclusive lives and to create stronger communities. Parker Palmer talks about way opening for giftedness. He says, our gifts make room for us. The way will open so that your gift can be used. If we are discerning of that, that's true for all of us. And so when we think about, creating full inclusive life, to me, this is critical. Discerning the gifts, looking for those way opens so that people can use their gifts, and then actively pursuing that way. Where people's giftedness is recognized, embraced, we find there are communities where all are welcome, not just tolerated. Stronger communities woven from many different threads to make a strong fabric, where we're all at the table, offering what we have to give.